This is the last signal radio. And if you are hearing this, it means you are still alive, and so am I. We have survived 100 days of war, and the world as we knew it is gone. The cities are leveled, the streets are empty, the homes abandoned, the skyscrapers blackened and shattered, the parks and rivers silent and lifeless. The sky above filled with ash and smoke so thick it chokes the sunlight. Yet we breathe, we move, we survive. We stumble through ruins, our feet crunching over broken glass and rubble, our eyes scanning shadows that may conceal life or death. I do not know where you are or how you made it this far, but if you hear me, it means you are still here. And that matters more than anything else, because survival is all we have left. The bombs fell first, shaking the ground with a violence unmatched in history. And then the aftermath hit harder than anyone could have imagined. The radiation that burns from within the air, thick with poison. The firestorms that engulfed neighborhoods. The sickness that spread silently from one survivor to another. The famine that gnaws at our bellies, and the water and air, both tainted, carrying death as easily as breath, changed the world forever. Our towns and cities reduced to ashes, our roads cracked and twisted, our bridges collapsed and molten steel bending in silence. People turned on each other, desperate to survive, some fighting, some hiding, some vanishing entirely into the ruins, some driven mad by fear and hunger, turning against those they once called neighbors, families torn apart, friends lost to the chaos. Yet even in the wreckage, even in the fear, life persists. We cling to it with every ounce of strength, every shallow breath, every careful step we move through streets that were once alive with laughter, now echoing only the sound of our own footsteps through debris and silence. I do not know what awaits around the next corner, a scavenger, a trap, a collapsed building, or nothing at all. But the uncertainty sharpens us, it drives us. It reminds us that the world is fragile, and so are we. Yet our will to survive has not been extinguished in the shadows. I have glimpsed signs of life, fleeting but persistent, the faint glow of a fire, the whisper of movement, the distant call of another soul seeking to endure the ash and smoke may obscure the sun and blacken the skies, but hope still exists, because you are hearing me, because I am here speaking, because the connection between us is stronger than fear and isolation, stronger than hunger, sickness, and despair. The world as we knew it may be gone, but we are not. We are still human. We still remember what it means to live and fight and breathe, and for as long as this signal exists, we are still connected. We are still fighting. We are still alive, and that is everything. And it is enough to keep moving, to keep surviving, to keep hoping that somewhere out there, another voice will join this one. Another breath will persist, another soul will endure, and together, even in silence, in ruin and in ash, we are proof that life refuses to surrender. There is no law, no order, no safety, only the fight for the next hour, the next minute, the next breath. And yet here we are, still breathing, still holding on against a world that seems determined to swallow us whole. I have been at this station since the beginning, broadcasting for hours without pause, without rest, because if there is anyone left to hear me, anyone clinging to life in the ruins, They need to know they are not completely alone. Sometimes I catch fragments in the static, a voice, a whisper, a story of someone moving through the shattered streets, someone scavenging, hiding, surviving. It may be real, or it may be the ghosts of my own mind, but even imagined, it is enough to remind me that life persists, that somewhere someone is still alive, still fighting, still refusing to surrender, and that connection, however fleeting, is enough to keep me speaking, to keep me tethered to purpose. The silence outside is crushing, pressing in from every direction like the weight of the sky, collapsing onto the broken streets. There is no sound of life, no laughter, no children, no hum of traffic, no music spilling from cafes, no conversations carried on the wind, only the sighing of the empty city, the rattle of broken buildings swaying in the wind, the occasional distant groan of rubble finally giving way, falling into dust and shadow. Yet even here, in this graveyard of civilization, we breathe, and that is enough for now. Every hour, every minute, every step through ash and debris is a choice to survive, a defiance against the emptiness, a proof that we refuse to vanish quietly. And if you are listening, then it means you too are choosing life, that you too are holding on, clinging to hope against the weight of the world, and that is all that matters. Even as despair looms, even as fear gnaws at the edges of thought, even as the night stretches endlessly across the broken landscape, we are alive. The act of breathing, the act of moving, of surviving one more moment, of listening, of connecting through this fragile signal, it is enough to remind us that humanity, though battered and scarred, persists. And in that persistence, in the simple, stubborn choice to endure, we find proof that the world has not claimed us entirely, that as long as a voice speaks into the void, as long as someone listens, as long as we remember to hold on, life continues, fragile but unbroken, and that is everything. I have walked through streets that were once filled with life, and now they are empty, hollowed-out shells of what used to be the pulse of civilization. Every step echoes against broken walls, every breath stirs the dust of memories. I see shadows moving in the distance. Sometimes they disappear as quickly as they appear, and I tell myself they are survivors, not illusions, not tricks of exhaustion, but real people out there, still fighting, still trying to hold on to what little remains. I hope they are someone out there clinging to life just like us, trying to believe that there is still something worth holding on to. I do not know how long this station will last. The power flickers more often now. The generator coughs like it's dying. The wires hum and spark, and I can feel the heat of their struggle. The equipment is failing, but I cannot stop. I will not stop. I must keep speaking, if only to remind you that you are not alone, that this signal means something, that humanity persists. Even in the darkest moments, I have seen the worst of what people become in desperation. I have seen cruelty. I have seen the hunger for survival twist love into violence and fear into madness. I have seen neighbors turn on one another for water, for warmth, for safety. But I have also seen the other side, the one thing that still makes us human. I have seen courage. I have seen people share their last scrap of food. I have seen hands reach out to lift someone from the dirt. I have seen the weak protected by those who could have walked away, and that is why I speak. I speak for them, for you, for those who may still hear this faint signal and wonder if there is still someone left who remembers what we once were. I speak for those who still move through the ruins, still searching for light in a world swallowed by ash. I have seen what remains of homes and buildings, their walls burned, their windows shattered, their doors gone, their foundations cracked. But sometimes within those hollowed skeletons, I catch glimpses of life. A faint glow from a small fire, someone moving carefully through the dark. Someone carrying water, someone holding on it is rare and fleeting, but it is enough. It is proof that we are not completely gone. It is proof that life finds a way through everything. And that is why I sit here speaking into this broken microphone, because maybe somewhere out there, someone needs to hear a voice, any voice, a sign that the world hasn't ended completely. And so I broadcast for as long as I can, as long as the static carries my words, as long as the signal survives. I will not stop, because if you are listening, it means you are part of something greater than despair. It means that you are part of the same pulse that keeps me going. It means we are connected even now in this wasteland. Even now, when everything has fallen apart, we survive because we refuse to surrender, because we cling to the fragile thread of life, because we are still human. And if you can hear me, then know this. You are not alone. You are part of what's left of us. You are the proof that hope is still alive. And as long as this signal holds, as long as you and I still breathe, we are still here. We are still human. And that is all that matters. The world is barely recognizable now. I have moved through the ruins today, and every step feels like walking through a graveyard of civilization. I have seen streets in New York emptied of life, the skyscrapers blackened and crumbling their shattered windows, reflecting ash and smoke, a city that once never slept, now silent, and hollowed out the parks, the subways, the avenues, all ghostly and still. I hear the wind whistle through broken buildings, carrying the scent of fire and decay. I hear reports from scattered signals, fragments of voices through static, that London has been leveled almost entirely, the Thames dark and thick with debris, the bridges gone or collapsed, twisted steel jutting from the water like broken bones. Paris whispers faintly through the interference of small groups of survivors, hiding in the outskirts, scavenging what little they can find. The streets empty, but for their cautious movements, no one knows for sure who remains, who has fallen, who has vanished into the rubble. The power grids dead, the hospitals destroyed, the communication lines gone, every connection severed. We are isolated everywhere. Yet somehow life clings to itself in quiet pockets, a stubborn, fragile persistence. Somewhere in Moscow, someone moves silently through the ruins seeking water, seeking food, watching the shadows for danger in Tokyo. Small fires flicker in the distance, like fragile beacons, signaling someone trying to survive, someone refusing to surrender. These small acts ripple through the ruins, like signals of life in a dead world. They are fragile, but they exist, and they are enough to keep hope alive, and enough to keep this broadcast going. I cannot confirm these reports. I only know what I see and hear through fragments, but each fragment is proof that life refuses to vanish entirely. The silence outside is deafening, pressing in like the weight of the sky collapsing on every street corner. Yet the occasional distant rumble of a collapsed building reminds me that destruction continues, that the world is still falling apart. Yet we persist. I see the remnants of homes gutted by fire, their walls blackened, their roofs caved in. Yet here and there a faint glimmer of life flickers in the shadows, a candle burning behind shattered glass, a figure moving carefully with a bundle of supplies, someone surviving despite everything. It is rare. It is fleeting. Yet it is enough to remind me that even in a world erased by war, humanity still breathes even in the smoke, the ash, the silence. Life clings stubbornly, and for that reason I continue to broadcast to reach anyone who is listening, to remind them they are not completely alone, even in the face of complete devastation, even when the streets are empty, and the cities hollowed, and the air thick with the scent of death. The world may have fallen apart, but somewhere someone persists, and that is enough to keep speaking, enough to keep surviving, enough to keep hope alive in the hearts of anyone who can hear this signal. Even now, I have scavenged what I could in the rubble today, searching for food, for water, for medicine, anything that will let me survive another day. It is a constant struggle, a ritual of survival, moving through the wreckage of what used to be homes and stores and lives. Every sound echoes too loudly. Every shadow feels like it's watching me, but I keep going. I sift through debris for anything that still holds value. A single can of food, a bottle of water, a strip of fabric to keep warm, it all matters. Now, every small thing carries the weight of life and death. Yet, through all of it, I return here to this microphone, to this fragile signal, because I cannot stop broadcasting, if only to remind anyone listening that they are not completely alone in the void, in the chaos, in the endless silence. There is still something human left, even if it is fragile, even if it flickers like a dying flame. I have seen the worst in people. Desperation tearing apart what little humanity they have left. I have seen fights over scraps of food, seen people betray each other for a sip of clean water, seen eyes go hollow from hunger and fear, and yet even in that darkness there are glimmers that refuse to die. I have seen courage, quiet, unspoken acts of it. I have seen someone give their last piece of bread to a stranger, someone share their water with a child that isn't theirs, someone take a risk to save another. When there was nothing to gain, I have heard it too, faint voices carried through static across broken frequencies, whispers of people still trying, still helping, still choosing kindness in the ashes. These voices are few and scattered, but they mean everything. They are proof that humanity has not been erased, that we are still capable of care, even when surrounded by ruin. And that is why this broadcast continues, why I sit here with failing equipment and a dying generator. Because if you can hear me, you are part of that same thread of humanity, part of that same fragile connection that refuses to die. You are proof that life remains, that hope still breathes in the dust. We are the remnants of what once was. But we are also the seeds of what might come after we survive, because we remember, because we reach out, because we refuse to go silent. And as long as this signal carries through the static, as long as you and I can still hear each other, it means we are still here, still human, still alive. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if there will be a tomorrow. I only know that right now we breathe and we survive. And somehow that is enough to keep going, Enough to keep speaking, enough to keep this fragile thread of humanity alive. I have walked the empty streets of Berlin today. The Brandenburg Gate stands shattered, its pillars cracked, its stones blackened by fire, the roads littered with ash, twisted metal, and fragments of glass where light no longer shines. I move through the silence, and it feels endless, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes breathing hurt the city that once hummed with voices and laughter, and life now feels like a tomb. And yet beneath that silence, I sense movement, faint and fragile, somewhere. Someone is alive. Somewhere, someone still fights for breath, still clings to life. And that alone is enough to remind me that the world is not completely dead. I cannot put into words the weight of it, the emptiness, the echo of what used to be. Every step through the ruins feels like walking through memory. Shadows of people who once were linger in the corners of my mind, and yet even here, even in this vast quiet, there are moments of light, small flickers that cut through the darkness. I see fires burning faintly in the distance. I see figures moving quietly through the rubble, searching, scavenging, hoping fragments of humanity, holding on, refusing to disappear. And if you are listening to this, if you can still hear my voice through the static, then you are one of them. You are holding on too, and that is why I speak. That is why I will not stop. As long as there is power left in these wires, as long as the microphone still carries my voice through the noise, as long as breath fills my lungs, this signal will continue, because it must. Because as long as someone listens, the world is not completely lost. As long as one voice answers another, we are still connected across continents, across ruins, across the ashes, across the silence. And that connection is everything. The world may be broken, but we are not finished as long as we breathe. We are not defeated as long as this faint transmission finds a listener. We endure, we survive, we persist. We remain proof that life still moves, that hearts still beat, that hope still flickers even in the ashes. So if you can hear me, if this signal reaches you, wherever you are, know this: you are not alone. This voice, this moment, this fragile link between us means we are still here. We are still human. We are still alive. And that is all that matters. The world outside is dead, silent, hollow. But life still clings stubbornly to existence, like roots pushing through concrete, refusing to let go. I have moved through the outskirts of Los Angeles today, the air heavy with dust and smoke. The freeways that once carried endless streams of light and motion now lie cracked and lifeless, empty veins of a dead city. The skyscrapers stand shattered, and smoking glass and steel twisted into strange shapes that no longer resemble anything human. The Pacific horizon is blackened and still. No waves, no movement, only the distant haze of burning oil and drifting ash. And yet even in this silence, even in this vast stillness, I sense faint signs of life somewhere. Someone is moving quietly through the rubble, shadows shifting between the remains of buildings, cautious, deliberate survivors or ghosts. It is hard to tell. A faint glow flickers in the distance, a small fire burning against the night. Maybe it is a signal. Maybe it is warmth. Maybe it is someone else refusing to vanish completely. I have heard fragments of transmissions broken and weak, scattered across the static. They speak of small pockets of survivors near Cairo, men and women trying to dig wells through poisoned soil, scavenging for drops of clean water. The Nile, dark and thick with debris, the ancient river that once gave life, now choked by death. Yet still they try, still they dig, still they endure. I have heard other whispers carried faintly across ruined frequencies, rumors from Rio de Janeiro, where parts of the city have collapsed into the ocean, towers leaning at impossible angles, and yet people move silently along the rooftops, searching for food and safety, gathering what little the sea has spared their voices come through, like echoes from another world, faint but real. None of this can be verified. I cannot know if these are truths or ghosts or desperate hope pretending to be news, but it does not matter, because the thought that somewhere, anywhere, humanity still persists is enough to keep this signal alive, enough to keep me speaking into the dark, even if no one answers, even if the only response is the soft hum of static. Because that hum means the world has not gone completely silent, not yet. And as long as I can hear it, as long as I can send these words into the void, I will continue, because hope is a fragile thing. But even now it survives, hidden between ruins, carried by faint signals, whispered by the living to remind the dying that life still exists, and that somewhere someone still listens. I have walked through the streets in Mumbai today, and what once was a city overflowing with life and noise is now nothing but silence and ruin. Entire neighborhoods, flattened blocks upon blocks, reduced to dust and broken concrete, the air so thick with smoke and decay that every breath feels like swallowing the end of the world. The smell clings to everything. It seeps into the skin, into the clothes, into the mind. And yet somewhere amid all of it, I saw movement, faint shapes moving quietly through the haze. A small group of survivors, careful and silent, clutching what little they have left, holding on to life, holding on to hope. And that is what this broadcast is for, to remind anyone listening that you are not alone. That even in the darkest places, even in the choking air, and the endless ruins, people still survive, even when the world has forgotten how to speak, even when the skies no longer carry light. Humanity refuses to die. The war came like a wave and swallowed everything. Whole nations collapsed in fire and thunder. The bombs fell first, splitting the world open in blinding light. And then came the aftermath. The slower destruction, the invisible decay that crept through every corner of the earth, the radiation, the sickness, the starvation, the madness. It devoured what the bombs had spared. The cities turned to dust. The rivers poisoned the fields, barren. The air, unbreathable. The power grids gone, the food supply, cut off the hospitals, destroyed the communications. Dead silence became the only constant. And yet somehow through all of it, some of us endure scattered fragments of life, holding on to whatever remains of the old world. I have seen people lighting fires in the ruins, cooking what little they can find. I have heard voices faint through the static fragments of language carried through broken transmitters. Someone reading names, someone calling for help, someone offering prayer. And in that chaos, in that emptiness, there is still connection. A fragile thread stretching across continents, across ash, across death itself. This is why I keep broadcasting, not because I believe I can fix anything, not because I expect rescue, but because as long as one voice still speaks and another still listens, the world has not completely ended. The light has not gone out, and we are not alone, even now, in the smoke and the ruin. We are proof that life continues, that the human spirit refuses to yield. We survive because we must, because we were born to endure, even when everything else is gone. And that is why I speak, and that is why you listen, because somewhere between my voice and your heartbeat, the world still lives. I do not know who will survive the next hour. I do not know who will survive the next day, but as long as you are hearing this signal, it means you are still here. It means that in some corner of this shattered planet there is still breath. There is still heartbeat. There is still proof that life continues, even if it is fragile, even if it flickers like a dying flame in the wind, even if it feels like the world is holding its last breath. I have seen the ruins of Istanbul today. The Bosphorus is littered with debris, twisted metal drifting beside shattered boats, the water thick with oil, and silence, the bridges that once connected continents now broken, the streets that once overflowed with voices and laughter now empty, the mosques and markets blackened and hollow, standing like ghosts of memory. And yet as I stood there amid the stillness, I felt something, a sense that somewhere among the ruins, someone was moving quietly, searching for water, or food, or shelter. Some survivor tracing the shape of what used to be life. And that thought alone gives me the strength to continue speaking, to keep this voice alive through the static, through the endless hum of emptiness. I have caught glimpses of the remnants of human life across the world, faint and scattered, but real in Tokyo. The skyline is cracked and burned, but from the distance, small fires burn on rooftops, someone tending to the light, someone refusing to let it die in Buenos Aires. The avenues are dust and rubble, but I have heard whispers of a signal, faint voices trying to reach out across the void, calling names, calling for anyone to answer in Cape Town. The streets lie in silence, but through the darkness I have seen shadows moving near the shore, small groups searching for food, dragging pieces of broken boats toward the water, trying to build something, anything that can still carry them forward each broken city. A reflection of the same story, a story of loss, of ruin, but also of persistence, the will to survive, the instinct to cling to life, even when everything else has fallen apart. And that is what keeps this broadcast alive. Not the hope of rescue, not the illusion of safety, but the truth that as long as there is one person left who refuses to give in, one person who still searches, one person who still listens, then the world has not ended completely. We are scattered. Yes, broken, yes, but not gone. We endure in fragments, in whispers, in small movements, through ash and ruin. And if you can hear this, if this signal finds its way to you through the noise, then you are part of that endurance, part of what remains, part of what refuses to die. The world has fallen silent, but we have not. We are still here. We are still breathing. We are still alive. I have scavenged what I could today. The food is scarce, the water. Scarcer every day is a battle for survival. Yet, I speak into this radio because if there is anyone out there who can hear me, they need to know they are not alone. We are connected across continents, across ruins, across the silence and the ash. I do not know how long this signal will last. The equipment is failing, the power intermittent, the station barely holding together yet. I will not stop broadcasting because even one person hearing my voice is proof that humanity persists. Even if the world is broken, even if everything we knew is gone, as long as we breathe, we endure. And if you hear this, you are not alone. We are still here, and that is all that matters. We are still connected across the ruins, across the ash, across the silence, across everything that has fallen. Yet, even now, we survive. And that is why this broadcast continues and will continue for as long as we have breath and as long as anyone is listening. And that is all that matters. This is the last signal. Radio, still alive, still broadcasting. The world is a graveyard. And yet I move through it, scavenging every scrap I can find. The streets of Los Angeles are empty. The freeways littered with abandoned cars, overturned and burned. The buildings hollowed and blackened, the air thick with smoke and the scent of decay. I search the ruins for anything that can keep me alive. Water. I have not had clean water in days. Food is scarce. The shelves in the stores empty or burned, the refrigerators open and rotting. Yet, I dig through the rubble, hoping to find a can, a bottle, a morsel, anything that will give me another hour, another day. I have seen shadows moving through the ruined streets. Maybe survivors, maybe ghosts. I cannot know. And yet every movement, every whisper in the distance reminds me that life persists. Somewhere. I have been to London today. The city a hollowed shell, bridges collapsed. The streets littered with rubble, yet I found a small shop with canned food hidden under fallen debris, a miracle, and it is enough to keep me moving. I have seen the worst of what desperation brings people fighting over scraps, risking death for a piece of bread, yet I have also seen moments of courage, a figure leaving water for someone else, hidden in the ruins, small gestures that make me believe that humanity refuses to die, even in the ashes of New York, Paris, Tokyo. The world is a shadow of itself, and yet small sparks remain. I carry what I can on my back. A few cans of food, a bottle of water, a piece of cloth to cover my face from the ash. I do not know how long this will last, how long I can survive, but the act of scavenging gives me purpose, gives me reason to keep breathing, to keep speaking. I have moved through Cairo. The river blackened the city, empty, yet someone has left scraps hidden beneath rubble. I do not know who they are, but that small act of survival and generosity gives me hope. I have scavenged in Berlin, Rome, Istanbul, each city leveled, yet in the shadows, there are hints of life, faint signs that humanity is not yet extinguished. I must move slowly, carefully, every step dangerous. The buildings unstable, the streets unstable. Yet I cannot stop scavenging, because to stop is to surrender, and surrender means death. And I will not give in. I gather what I can carry, each piece, a lifeline, each step. A small victory. The wind howls through broken streets, carrying ash and whispers of the dead. The sky dark and choking. Yet even in this darkness, I find fragments of life, fragments of hope. I leave markers as I move, signs that someone else might follow. Markers that say someone is alive, someone is moving. Someone cares even in the dead world. And that is why I speak, why I broadcast, why I search and scavenge, because as long as I breathe, as long as I find scraps, as long as I move through these ruins, I am alive, and so are you. If you hear me, and that is enough to hold on to, that is enough to survive. That is why this broadcast continues and will continue as long as there is breath, as long as there is life, as long as anyone is listening, and I am still here, and you are still listening, and that is everything. The world outside is a graveyard, yet danger lurks in every shadow today. I moved through the outskirts of Tokyo, the streets empty, the buildings hollowed and scarred, the wind carrying ash, and the faint cries of the lost. Yet I felt eyes on me, shadows shifting in the ruins, someone or something watching. I cannot tell, and fear grips me tighter than hunger or exhaustion. Every step is a risk, every breath a gamble. The streets of New York whisper with the ghosts of the fallen, and I must move carefully even in the silence, because danger is everywhere. People desperate will kill for water, for food, for survival, and yet sometimes it is not people at all. I hear distant groans, maybe radiation sickness, maybe starving scavengers, maybe creatures driven mad by the collapse of the world. Tokyo, Cairo, Berlin, New Delhi, all these cities are empty shells. But danger moves through the ruins, like smoke, like wind, like death itself. I have narrowly escaped a collapsed building in London, a section of rubble giving way beneath my feet. I crawled through dust and smoke to reach safety, and I carry the fear with me like a second skin. It reminds me that survival is not just about finding food or water. It is about navigating the broken world without losing yourself to panic, without becoming prey. I hear whispers through static from scattered survivors from Rio de Janeiro, Istanbul, Lagos, reports of ambushes, desperate fights for supplies. The world has shrunk to shadows and echoes, and yet even in this chaos, there are moments of courage. I saw someone leave a water bottle hidden under debris for another stranger in Berlin, a reminder that humanity, fragile as it is, has not been completely extinguished. I move through the ruins of Los Angeles today, the freeways twisted, the skyscrapers blackened, and some shadows moving quickly. I cannot know if they are friend or foe. Yet, I hope for the best. Yet, I prepare for the worst. Fear is constant, but so is hope. I scavenge quickly, watching every corner, every window, every dark alley. The wind carries the smell of smoke and ash and death. Yet I push forward because to stop is to surrender to the darkness. I hear static reports from Moscow, small groups scavenging quietly, avoiding danger. The world is littered with peril, yet life insists on clinging to itself even in the shadows, even under threat, even when the sky above burns with ash and radiation. I press on every step, a testament to human stubbornness, a refusal to yield to despair. The danger is real. The desperation is everywhere. The collapse complete. Yet, I broadcast this not only to tell you I am alive, but to remind you that if you hear this, you too are surviving. You too are moving through the ruins of this broken world. And that is proof that humanity is not yet gone, that hope is not yet extinguished. The streets may be empty, the cities may be hollowed, the dangers many, But life persists as long as we breathe, as long as we are alert, as long as we refuse to surrender, and I will keep speaking, as long as there is breath in me, and as long as someone is listening, because that connection across the ruins, across continents, across the silence, is what keeps us human. And that is why this broadcast continues and will continue, and I am still here, and you are still listening, and that is everything. I walk through the ruins today, and my mind drifts to what the world used to be. The streets of Paris, once filled with laughter, now hollowed and silent. The Eiffel Tower, a blackened skeleton against the ash-filled sky. I remember walking there in the sunlight, crowds buzzing with life music spilling from cafes, children playing, and now only silence remains, New York. The streets once full of life, now rubble and smoke. Yet I remember the skyscrapers glittering in the sun. The subways crowded the laughter, the chaos, the hum of humanity. Berlin, the Brandenburg Gate. Once a symbol of history, now shattered, yet I remember it lit up at night, full of people moving through the city. I remember the smell of food, the warmth of homes, the faces of strangers now gone. Tokyo, the neon lights now darkened. Yet I remember the bustling streets, the trains running, the music, the chatter, the smells of ramen and street food, the hum of life now replaced with ash and silence. I think of Cairo, the Nile flowing strong, once vibrant, now blackened with debris and ash. I remember the markets full of colors, the spices, the laughter, the people moving through the streets now empty and quiet. I remember Sydney, Istanbul, Rio de Janeiro, Lagos, London, all these places once alive, now mostly gone. Yet the memories remain in my mind like a lifeline, like a beacon. I cling to the memory of what was to remind myself that life was beautiful, that humanity had warmth and color and connection, and that even now we can survive. Even now we can endure, even now we can hold on to fragments of that world in our hearts as we move through the ruins, scavenging, searching, speaking into the radio to reach anyone who remains alive. The memories sting like fire, yet comfort me. At the same time, they remind me that we are not completely destroyed, that we have existed before this apocalypse. And if we can remember, we can survive. We can rebuild even in the smallest ways, even in the tiniest gestures, even in the faintest sparks of life. The streets are empty, the cities blackened, the rivers poisoned. Yet the world once existed in all its beauty, and I hold on to that as I broadcast, so that if anyone hears me, they too may remember the world before and know that it is possible to endure, to survive, to keep the memory of beauty alive, even in the darkness, even in the ruins, even in the silence. And that is why this broadcast continues, because memory is life. Memory is connection. Memory is humanity. And as long as I speak, as long as you hear, we are still alive. We are still human. And that is everything. And I will not stop speaking. And you are still listening. And that is all that matters. I saw hope in the smallest things today as I moved through the ruins of Moscow. The streets empty and silent. The buildings scarred, hollowed out by fire and neglect. The snow beneath my feet blackened with ash and soot. And yet even in the midst of this desolation, A single candle flickered in a broken window, its flame trembling against the cold and darkness, a quiet pulse of light in a city that had almost forgotten what life meant. A faint signal that someone is still alive, someone is still surviving. Someone refuses to surrender to despair despite the rubble, despite the silence, despite the crushing weight of the world fallen around them. That tiny flame reminded me that even here, even now, hope can exist. It can persist. It can endure a stubborn defiance against everything trying to snuff it out in New York. I found something equally fragile, yet equally powerful, a small cache of clean water hidden in the ruins of a collapsed store, a lifeline for the desperate, a gift left perhaps by someone long gone, or perhaps for those yet to arrive. It doesn't matter, because the act itself speaks louder than any words it reminded me, that even in a world that feels dead, even when every street and building has been broken, and every sky is gray with smoke, kindness can still exist. It can survive. It can reach out across emptiness and touch those who stumble upon it. I realized then that hope is not always a grand thing. It is not always a roaring fire or a heroic gesture. It is in the quiet persistence of life. It is in the small acts of care and thoughtfulness, the scraps of food shared, the water left for strangers, the faint light burning in the window at night. These moments are fragile, yes, but they are also proof that humanity endures, and that is why I continue to broadcast, because these small signals are the threads that connect us across ruins, across cities, across silence, across destruction. Each flicker, each gesture, each faint act of survival is a message that we are not entirely lost, that life persists in pockets, even when the world seems empty and hopeless. And if you are listening, then you are part of that connection, part of that small network of living people holding on to each other in the dark, and knowing that even in the most broken world, kindness persists even in the dead streets. Hope flickers, and that is enough to keep going, enough to keep breathing, enough to keep fighting, enough to keep speaking, so that the signal carries on and maybe reaches someone who needs it. Maybe reaches someone who will survive. Maybe reaches someone who will remember that even when everything else falls apart, we are still human. And even the smallest act of light can ripple outward to remind us that life is still possible and we are still alive. In Rio de Janeiro, I saw a shadow move across a rooftop, carrying scraps of food for someone else unseen, yet still connected, a gesture so small it could easily be overlooked in a world that once bustled with millions of people, but now in the emptiness of the streets, it felt sacred. It felt alive. It struck me how fragile, yet powerful life can be, how it persists in the smallest acts, how a single choice to share, to give, to protect, can ripple outward even in a city swallowed by ruin. In the ruins of Paris, I watched a pigeon land on a crumbled wall, pecking at seeds spilled long ago, long forgotten, yet somehow still nourishing life. And in that quiet insistence, I felt a pulse of stubborn survival, the simple rhythms of living creatures continuing, as if to whisper that the world is not entirely dead, that existence will find a way even through ash and stone. In Tokyo, I saw someone sweeping the ashes from a tiny garden, tending a single sprout of green, pushing through blackened streets against wind, fire, and ruin. And it was enough to stop me in my tracks, enough to make me remember that hope can grow anywhere, even in the most broken places. Even when the world seems determined to erase all life, I carry these moments with me as I move through the rubble. Scavenging, searching, broadcasting. Not just to survive, but to bear witness, because they are proof that humanity has not vanished. Proof that even in the midst of destruction, death, and despair, there are sparks that refuse to die, tiny threads of connection that bind us across space and silence, each one a testament to the stubbornness of life, a reminder that kindness, care, and hope can persist even when everything else has been lost. I imagine these moments spreading outward like ripples across a dead sea, across continents, across ruins, across silence, across ash, connecting those who remain the living threads of what was and what can still be. This is why I keep transmitting, why I speak into the void, why I continue even when exhaustion presses against my body and fear presses against my mind, because somewhere someone may hear these words and know they are not alone. Somewhere someone may see their own spark mirrored in these stories and feel the courage to carry on somewhere. Even in the darkest corner, life can be nurtured and protected and preserved. Each act of survival, each tiny gesture of hope is proof that the world is not completely lost. And as long as even one voice speaks, and even one person listens, the signal persists. And with it, the knowledge that humanity endures, that hope remains, that life will continue, and that even in the blackest ruins, the smallest acts can illuminate the darkness and remind us that we are still alive and that we are still connected. I have seen desperate acts of survival. I have seen violence. I have seen greed. I have seen cruelty. The worst of humanity laid bare in the ruins of cities that once pulsed with life. I have seen neighbors turn on one another for a scrap of food, for a bottle of water. For the smallest advantage, I have seen fear twist, love into something unrecognizable. I have seen people driven to acts they would have never imagined possible. And yet even in the shadows of such darkness, there are small miracles hidden quietly between the rubble moments of courage and kindness that flicker like fragile flames in the night, gestures so delicate that they might seem insignificant. But in this broken world, they carry the weight of life itself. A hand reaching out to lift someone from the dust, a stranger sharing the last portion of their food, a voice whispering comfort in a ruined alley. These small acts are proof that even when everything is gone, we remain human. Even when the cities have burned, even when the streets are empty, even when the sky is heavy with ash and smoke, the capacity for compassion persists. I found a journal in Berlin, among the debris pages frayed and edges scorched by smoke, the leather cover cracked and blackened. Yet within it, someone had poured out their existence, sketches of buildings they once loved, diagrams of the streets they had walked, words written in graphite that traced the arc of hope and fear and endurance. They had survived weeks in hiding each page, a testament to the human spirit, to memory, to intention, to love, a message left behind that says, I was here. I survived. I cared. I remembered it, reminded me that life is not merely breathing. It is creating it. It is recording it. It is leaving traces that say we exist. We endure even in isolation, even in darkness, even when everything around us collapses. This journal was a quiet miracle, a proof that even in devastation, humanity continues, that hope is not erased by bombs or fire or ash, that memory and intention and love persist, that someone, somewhere, chooses to reach beyond themselves to leave something for others to find. And it is these fragments, these small, scattered sparks that I carry with me as I move through ruins, scavenging, searching, broadcasting. I carry them so that they might reach someone else, a survivor, somewhere. Listening to this signal, a whisper in the dark, a reminder that they are not alone, that even in the face of despair, life continues, that courage and kindness are still possible, that memory still matters, that hope, however fragile, can still survive in this broken world. And that is why I continue to speak, why I continue to broadcast into the void, why I carry on even when exhaustion threatens to overtake me, even when despair presses in like the weight of the world itself. Because even a single spark, even a single act of memory, even a single gesture of love can ripple outward across the ruins, across cities, across continents, and remind us all that we are still human, that we still endure, that life persists, and that even in the darkest of times, hope is not lost. In Cairo, someone left a jar of water in the corner of a burned-out building, a lifeline for anyone who might stumble upon it weeks later, and it struck me how fragile yet enduring hope can be in the outskirts of Istanbul. A small fire burned on a balcony, someone cooking what little they had. It smelled faintly of bread, and reminded me of what we had lost, yet also of what can be preserved if we fight to keep it alive. I speak to you now, because if you are listening, you are part of that hope. You are part of those small acts of survival, those hidden sparks that defy the darkness. You are connected to every person who lights a candle, who leaves water, who tends a garden, who shares food, who writes a message in the rubble. And that is why this broadcast continues and will continue. Because as long as I speak, as long as you hear, we are still connected across the ruins, across continents, across cities, across silence. And that is why we endure. That is why we survive. That is why hope, no matter how small, is enough to keep going. And I am still here, and you are still listening. And that is everything, and I will not stop speaking, and you will keep surviving, and that is all that matters. The fear never leaves me today. I walked through the ruins of London, the streets empty, the buildings scarred and smoking, and every shadow seemed to hold death. Every creak of broken glass, every distant groan set my heart pounding. I fear losing everything, the supplies I carry, the scraps of food, the water, the fragile hope I cling to, the shelter I find each night. I fear that it will all be gone, that one wrong step, one unseen trap, one desperate survivor will end it all, that today will be my last day, and yet I move forward because the alternative is surrender. And surrender is death. I have moved through the ruins of New York. I have seen entire blocks collapse, entire streets blackened by fire and ash. And yet the fear drives me to survive, every nerve alert, every sense focused on the smallest details in Tokyo. I found a broken grocery store, the shelves empty. But I gathered what little I could yet. I fear it will not last. I fear the scarcity that grips the world, that every city from Cairo to Berlin to Rio de Janeiro to Sydney holds the same desolation and danger. I fear the loneliness, the endless silence, the knowledge that one day I may be the last living soul in this world, and that fear is suffocating yet necessary. It sharpens my instincts. It keeps me moving. It keeps me scavenging. It keeps me broadcasting so that if anyone is listening, they too may survive the terror that grips our world. I fear losing the connection that binds us across continents, across ruins, across ash, across silence. I fear that the human thread may snap, that the world may be truly empty. But even in that fear, I find strength. I continue, because survival is not guaranteed. And yet the act of surviving itself is defiance. I fear the shadows in Berlin, the winds in Cairo, the ash-filled air in Moscow. I fear hunger, thirst, radiation, collapse, and yet I push forward because fear alone does not kill hope, does not kill humanity. Only surrender does, and I will not surrender. I fear losing everything yet. I carry every scrap of hope I can find. I leave markers for others. I move cautiously. I gather water and food. I cling to life. I broadcast across the ruins, because as long as I speak, as long as someone hears, there is resistance, there is survival, there is humanity. And that is why this signal continues and will continue. Because even if I lose everything, I still have my voice. And if you hear me, you still have yours. And that is all that matters. And I am still here. And you are still listening. And that is everything. I have seen the darkest sides of this world, the destruction, the death, the silence. Yet in fleeting moments I see humanity flicker, like a candle in the wind today. I found a figure moving quietly in the ruins, carrying scraps of food for someone else unseen. Yet connected in that act, I saw courage in its purest form. I saw hope survive in the smallest gesture, a whispered word of encouragement, a shared bottle of water, a hand offered to help someone over rubble. These are the moments that remind me that we are not completely lost, even when the world is reduced to ash and ruin, even when the smoke and silence weigh on every step, even when hunger and fear gnaw at the mind and body. Still, there are those who choose to act with kindness. I have seen the frail give their last morsel to the weaker. I have seen someone shield another from collapsing debris. I have seen hands reach across broken ground to offer warmth and comfort. In a frozen world, the smallest gestures carry more weight than any fortress or weapon in a world that has fallen. They are proof that life persists, that the human spirit endures even in despair, even in devastation, even in loneliness. I broadcast these moments because if you hear this, you too are part of that humanity. You too are connected to those flickers of light across the ruins, the kindness of strangers, the courage of those who refuse to surrender to despair, reminds us that even in the darkest hours, we are not alone. We are still human. We still endure. We still survive. I move through the wreckage carrying these memories, collecting the sparks and holding them close, because when hope is scarce and despair presses, these moments are lifelines. They remind me why I breathe, why I search, why I speak, why I survive. Because even in a broken world, humanity exists in small acts, and as long as I witness them, as long as I can broadcast them, as long as you hear me, that humanity continues, And that is why this signal persists and will continue for as long as we are alive, for as long as we dare to care. And that is all that matters. And I am still here, and you are still listening, and that is everything. Today, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. Hope not faint or flickering, but strong, alive, pulsing through the ruins, pulsing through every breath I take. I have walked through darkness, through silence, through ash and debris, and yet life insists on existing in the smallest forms, in the quiet acts of survival, in the courage of those who still move forward even when the world has turned against us, even when every step is uncertain, even when fear claws at every thought. I am reminded that the will to survive is stronger than destruction, stronger than despair, stronger than the darkness that surrounds us. I see it in the way someone tends a small fire, just to feel warmth in their hands. I see it in the way someone shares the last scrap of food. Not because they are generous, but because they are human. I see it in myself as I continue to broadcast, to move, to breathe, to live. Even when all seems lost, hope is not abstract. It is real, it is tangible, it is survival, it is connection, it is refusing to surrender to the void, it is speaking even when no one seems to hear it, is searching even when the world is empty. It is surviving, even when every reason to stop exists. Hope is alive in the will to continue. It is alive in every heartbeat. It is alive in every act of courage, however small, in every gesture of kindness in the shadows of this broken world, and I carry it with me as I move through the ruins, as I broadcast this signal, as I cling to life. I carry it for anyone who may hear this, anyone who may still be alive, anyone who needs to know they are not alone. That even when everything is gone, the essence of life persists. Hope exists. Hope endures. Hope is enough to keep us alive. And if you hear me, know that hope is alive in you too, even in fear, even in hunger, even in silence, even in despair. We are alive. We are connected. We persist. And as long as I speak, and as long as you listen, hope will continue to ripple across the ruins, across the darkness, across everything that has fallen. And that is why this signal exists. That is why this broadcast continues. That is why we survive. And I am still here, and you are still listening. And that is everything. And hope is everything. And we are alive. And that is all that matters.